Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Connecticut Common Sense. We are back for another edition of our awesome podcast here with Selena Rifkind, myself, Jason Douglas, and our very special co-host, Jake Dell, Pastor Jake Dell from Woodbury. Welcome, Jake. Good to have you here.
Good to be
Um,
back.
it's great to have you back. A lot of things have happened in the last 3 months or so since we last
hmm
spoke with you. A lot of good things, I think. So um, we want this forum to be again for you to talk about where you're at and where we since we I think it was April if I'm not mistaken
I
when
mean,
you were
the
here
spring.
last
That's right. Yeah.
and we talked a lot about the separation of church and state and
hmm
the delusion that liberals give that somehow we can't talk about politics in church because
That's right. And, something Selena said during that conversation really sort of snowballed in that she had mentioned she had done some research into the Connecticut State Constitution and its revisions. And I looked them up and noticed that it was the 1965 revision to the state constitution that really kind of finally secularized Connecticut entirely. But prior to that, there had been some remaining privileges, particularly for Christian, faith and Christian worship in the Connecticut Constitution. Now, how much of that was actually observed in practice is probably an open question, but it was interesting to know that it was as late as 1965 that at least a kind of public Christianity was still assumed by Connecticut's Constitution.
mm-hmm. It's not that long ago,
That's
really.
really not that long ago. It's living memory for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean the church is used to, hold everything up. It
That's right.
that was the community, that was where people went,
Mm-hmm.
you were socializing with people every, weekly at a
hmm
minimum.
hmm
And this is, I think one of the things we've really lost in terms of, with the loss of congregation memberships, or group memberships is that we lose the community that's involved in that. And
That's right.
we lose those connections. And I mean, certainly in our delightful modern world, we spend a lot of time in our houses, which are much larger than they used to be,
It's for sure.
and filled with vast arrays of entertainment.
Right.
So we're not, so we, and then we don't know how to get along. And
Well,
we
that's
don't know how to get along.
yeah.
We're alienated from one another.
Well, that reminds me of an article that was based on research that was pre-pandemic and even somewhat older, maybe even really pre sort of the iPhone and the advent of these smart devices that we all are attached to right now. But basically, it was talking about as Sunday blue laws were abolished, which is to say,
Mm.
as more things were allowed to happen on Sunday morning. Um, the depression index went up, and you would think it would be just the opposite, right? Because you would think, oh, now we're free from this burden to go to church and we can go do whatever we want. Well, the reality is that sure, you have Little League and you have other things going on Sunday morning now that you may not have had in the past. Bars and restaurants or whatever are open, your
Mm-hmm.
hardware store is open, but the reality is that a lot of people are not doing anything, whereas in the past they were at least getting out and socializing, as you say. And so
Mhm.
we have lost that civic connection that the churches used to really be a part of. But culture has changed as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are other places where people go, and if you can believe it, CrossFit.
That's right. It's practically a church, from what I understand.
Yeah,
So-
yeah. I'm like, okay. I'd like to see something slightly more spiritual than that.
right.
But hey, at least it's community. That's better
Brings
than
people
Community. It's
together, I
Yep.
suppose, right?
That's
yes,
right.
yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that in '65 when a lot of people don't realize we've talked about this on the show in the past, but I think people just assume that our state constitution is the one that was ratified back in 17 something.
Oh, yeah.
I think
When
yeah,
it
a
all
lot of
got
people probably
started.
don't even realize we have a state constitution. That
Yeah, you're probably right.
all
But
50 states have a constitution,
well,
right?
I mean, I personally, I followed politics in Connecticut my whole life since I was a boy. I feel like I'm fairly knowledgeable, but yet I didn't know there was a new constitution in 1965.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know that until Selena told me this spring.
Well, and
So,
one of the things that really kind of snowballed from her observation was when I bet so I after we talked, I went back and read it myself, and I was struck by the clause in the first article which talks about religion, and it says that yes, we have Connecticut citizens are entitled to the free exercise of religion, provided provided that church doesn't promote bad things, right? Provided that church doesn't promote licentious behavior, which is, lawlessness or disregard for rule and order, for right and wrong, for, particularly often we associate licentious behavior with lewdness or a sort of immoral sexuality, but really just means any kind of law breaking. When you're racing down Route 6 at 70 miles an hour on your motorcycle, that's licentious behavior because
Yeah.
you're showing absolute disregard for life and property.
Yep.
And to say nothing of, peace, right? I mean, I live right on Main Street. Why do I have to be subjected to loud noise all the time? That's licentious behavior. Well, if your churches are promoting licentious behavior, there's actually a constitutional requirement for the state to police that. And so one thing led to another after Selena's comment, and shortly thereafter, the Project Veritas videos came out about this alleged pastor in Hartford who was promoting transitioning among minors, among minor children. Now, say what you will about transgenderism among transitioning among adults, who are legally free from any sort of parental oversight. When you're talking about children, it's just a clear-cut case of promoting licentious behavior. And so
Yeah.
I
It
wrote
is.
to the Attorney General William Tong and said, you ought to investigate this because these are pretty serious charges. And it's more than just it's more than a violation of civil rights, and it's more than a criminal charge here. This is a constitutional issue
Yeah.
for the
Mhm.
state, Attorney General Tong. And he ignored me. Uh,
Of course.
Two senators, Berthel and Martin, wrote to him and asked him to investigate, and he responded to them, but basically said no. And then, just as I was getting started on my vacation at the end of July, I got a nice friendly call from the state police asking, what the Attorney General had asked them to investigate what I meant by a tweet that I had put out. And the header for the tweet was "Silence equals death," which of course was something that the LGBT movement used in the 1980s
Yeah.
to promote, to really raise awareness about the AIDS crisis, and that this was not something that public health authorities could afford to be silent about because men were dying.
Right.
And so I turned around and said, use the same language that they use
Mm.
and still use to this day. I said, silence equals death if you're not going to investigate these licentious churches,
Right.
and I had to, but it was I who got the phone call from the
Yeah.
detective asking me to
Targeted
explain
you.
myself. And as far as I know, nothing's been done about this. The licentious churches, the ones that are flying the Pride Progress flags and all of that. So
Yeah. That was awful. They're using it as a venue to indoctrinate kids, just like
right.
they do in the schools. And it's a real problem. And again, I think that the language that you mentioned in the first article of the Constitution is that's not what was intended.
Right.
And it's one thing to another thing is this behavior that you're talking about that's mentioned in churches. Well, that can be interpreted into anything. A lot of people on the left are out saying that the things that our policies are criminal, that
Right.
right-wing policy. So now they could twist that around into any right-wing talk is now lascivious behavior or
Well,
criminal.
exactly. And someone did ask me about that. They said, "Oh, are you sure you want to get the state or involved or the police involved and what aren't you worried they'll turn around and use it on us?" And I said, I'm sorry, what do you think they've been doing to us for the last
Exactly.
60 years?
Yeah,
And
something
and
new.
so first of all, they don't abide by the rules to begin with. They're going to use their power to bully Christians, at 6 ways from Sunday, and any opportunity they can get. They don't need a constitution to tell them they can or can't do it. And
Yeah,
secondly, the Constitution, that provision was put there for a reason, which was to protect Christians and churches, and because there is such a thing as an authentic church. And I'm not here, nor is the Constitution, I think, nor do I think the civil authority is competent to adjudicate between, Protestants and Catholics, or whether you believe in, the Immaculate Conception or what happens at Holy Communion. These doctrinal questions are not what we're asking the state to decide for us. But when a church crosses the line and is really promoting something that is straight up anti-Christian, it really doesn't deserve the protection of the state anymore. It doesn't deserve the tax exempt status. It doesn't deserve a lot of what we grant churches and religions under the free exercise clause. It's not a free exercise to do whatever you want and call it religion.
yeah, that's for sure.
No, religion should be reaching upward.
Mm-hmm.
And
Fundamental rights are being stamped on. I mean, When I was a kid, when I was 10 years old in Bolton, I was hit in the head with a horseshoe.
Mm.
And I had to go to the hop. My mother was away for the day on an antique buying spree or something. And my neighbor's mother had to take me to the emergency room. And they weren't even going to give me any kind of medication or a tetanus shot or anything until I had permission from my mother.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, unless I was going to keel over and die right there, they were going to wait for my mother's permission to give me that medicine, and
Right.
that's for something that I really needed at the time. That
That's what you really needed.
wasn't for chopping off my what down.
Yeah.
What they're doing these days to kids is this is incredible, isn't it, Jake?
It's
It's like
really
a bad
incredible.
science fiction movie.
Yeah, and I've had the opportunity now in part because of, preaching a couple of the sermons that I preached and some of the publicity around what the Attorney General did, to talk to candidates like Jonathan DeBarros, another fellow, Charles Smith, who's the father of a child or father of his daughter who transitioned, and because he wouldn't affirm her as a him, she was taken away and by
Saw
DCF.
that video.
And
Yeah.
she's an adult now, so he's reestablished contact. But wow, this is really happening. And so you're right. You're absolutely right, Jason, about you couldn't even get a tetanus shot or what you needed when you were younger, and yet
Without parents' permission, right?
without parents' permission, and yet this truly
It's a complete perversion
perversion is
yeah,
not only allowed but promoted.
which is incredible. It's incredible to me. It's incredible. This is the kind of stuff that needs to be stopped at all costs. Don't you agree? We can't just let this continue.
I mean, it needs to be stopped. I don't know about all costs. It's sort of, we definitely have, the right to object to it, to protest it, to preach against it, to demonstrate against it, and we have to organize. We have to get organized and
can't let it continue.
use the mechanisms that we have at our disposal, the political process, to get rid of these people, push them out of office, and restore some sanity to our local and state government.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things I actually wanted to talk to you about. Jason and I were talking about it before, is that one of our projects is trying to reclaim the local Republican town committees, which are, I don't know if you've investigated any of that yet, but they're.
I mean, I've had occasion. Some seem better than others. Some seem,
most are.
Yeah,
we got a few that are really good. There are some really good ones, but it's just, I think it's the exception rather than the rule.
So we were wondering if you would like to have one or both of us come and talk to your congregation about that, because we would love to. So
yeah, I mean, I think that would be I'd definitely be open to that. We have a kind of a Sunday, an adult Sunday school forum after church sometimes. And I think that kind of civic, I mean, last Sunday I preached, and this is a theme that keeps coming up in my sermons, but it was very explicit last Sunday that Christianity is a political religion. There's a political element to our faith, and that does mean getting involved. And so I think that would dovetail nicely with the message that I've been preaching lately.
Okay. We would be tickled. So we'll have to figure out a date. I am actually, and I just signed up for my last class for my degree, and so I'm juggling a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah, well,
but it should be relatively soon. So one of the books that I've been reading, and I don't know if you've read this, maybe you have, it's called The Devil and Karl Marx.
That rings a bell. I'm not sure I've read it though.
It's worth it. It's worth your time to read. It's written by a historian, and he's written a lot of stuff about communism. And there are multiple chapters in there about how the communists deliberately went into Christian churches, Christian seminaries,
right.
And I'm just wondering how much that is part of what's happening with these churches that are flying pride flags.
Well, I think that is what is happening or happened, I think is probably better to put it in the past tense. So much so that, you're maybe 2 or 3 generations into it now. Whereas, so I think that the conscious programming, the conscious effort to subvert these institutions happened 80 to 100 years ago, right? And so we're now living downstream with the after effects of that. But absolutely. And what you don't have to really try too hard to read what is passes for theology these days at a place like Yale Divinity School, and I don't mean to just pick on them, just name any
Oh, go
divinity.
on, pick on them.
I mean, name any of them, and they're almost always going to be, influenced on some level by what's called liberationist or liberation theology, or some sort of critical approach to theology, whether it's the higher criticism that came out of the 19th century, which, or nowadays, which is basically a queer or feminist or Latinx interpretation, black. I mean, there was a book a few years ago called, Reading the Gospel, Reading the Bible While Black. And it's not as if to say that no one can offer a unique or compelling perspective on the scriptures from a different point of view or through a cultural lens. Absolutely. You mean you and I do that anytime we pick up the Bible and read, and we are reading it through our lived experience,
Right.
whatever that is. If if we're white, if we're man, if we're a woman, if we're black, of course we bring all of that with us as we read the scriptures. But
It's
I think
about
what
intent.
happened is, what's that?
It's about intent. It's about
It's
the
about
intent.
intent. Yeah, I think what
Yeah.
happened is that you take what is a very legitimate and natural thing to do. Jesus does this all the time with his parables. He speaks in the vernacular. He speaks in the language of the people. So
Mhm.
it's a very natural thing to do when you're applying the scripture to your own life to filter it through a cultural or lens or whatever lens you want. But it's another thing entirely to build an entire ideology around that and use it purposely to subvert the institution, which I think is exactly what you're talking about, Selena.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it was fairly horrifying. I mean, as I'm working on my thesis,
Hmm.
I think I mentioned I've been looking at, the data on, the loss of congregations,
Hmm.
the loss of membership in congregations, and I'm just wondering how much that had to do with it. I think there are other causes, and I'm happy to see that it's, that's leveled off and hopefully will
Hmm.
go back up again. Um, but I'm wondering how much of that ideology corrupting, people's minds, whether that was through membership or whether that was through what was being preached. Because, my memories of not, it's like there's a reason why I left, and a lot of it had to do with no one had any answers to what I was looking
Hmm.
for. Like, and it was just like the answer they gave me was just like, really?
Right,
I mean, it was literally horrifying. I cried.
right, right.
Um, and I just am like, I'm wondering how much that might have had to do with that.
Well, I mean, I just got done teaching an adult Sunday school series on J. Gresham Macham's book, Christianity and Liberalism. And he wrote that book in 1923 or something like that. And so I was teaching from the 100th anniversary edition of it. And it's amazing to read that book 100 years later because it could have been written yesterday in terms of what he's describing. And he's describing exactly what you're talking about. He's describing the fundamental dishonesty that it took place in the seminaries and the divinity schools where faculty encouraged young men at that point to hide their liberalism, to hide their lack of faith, to hide their, to go out there into the congregations and keep everything the same in terms of the way it looked. Don't change the outfit, the robes you're wearing. Don't change the service. Don't change the hymns. Don't change the architecture, but subtly change the message. Leave certain things out. Don't press home this point about sin. Don't press home these points about the miracles or
Yeah,
the
that's
supernatural reality of God.
indoctrination.
It's right. So there was a deliberate subversion that started well over 100 years ago, and then it just worked its way through the system such that you're no longer even conscious of it, right? I mean, does a fish know he's wet? No. I mean, and we're in late stage communism now, where it's like, yeah, you've got little Marxists running around, and they don't know they're Marxists, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah. The ones that are going to vote for the ones that are the dumb young kids in New York City, they're going to vote for Mondami.
and
Their
yet,
intention isn't bad. They're just
that's right.
clueless.
The intention isn't bad. They're not clueless, and he's speaking to real, concerns that they have, and
Yeah.
that's where I think the other side needs to really step up its game and provide other, better answers. I see, I
Yeah.
commend the Trump
That's a
administration
similar
for
problem.
trying to do this. Yeah.
We do. I think on our side, we do a little bit. We're very good at defining the problem and putting
Right.
down communism, but I honestly don't think we do enough to promote capitalism, for instance, talk about the virtues of
Well,
it.
that's it. That's
You
it.
know,
And I mean, Selena, you said you were talking to people and they didn't have the answers, and I think you do. There are questions, I think we alluded to this before we started recording, the big questions that, you know, the meaning of life type questions, I would be a little cautious of anybody who has all the answers there, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
right, of
Right.
course.
he's probably running a cult, and so
That's fair. That's
I'm always a little cautious with anybody who says he has all the answers, or who even even a Christian who says that he has God's answer for everything. We're just not going to understand some things that happen to us or that happen in this life, but
Right.
we can we can make the case for Christianity. We can make the case, which dovetails a lot of times with capitalism, not because capitalism is inherently Christian, but because capitalism, I think, is the result of 2,000 years of a Christian social development, a social project that resulted in this understanding of freedom of association, a free exercise of religion, ordered liberty, not licentiousness, but ordered liberty. All of what we take for granted of as the American way has a kind of Protestant Christian genesis origin.
Yeah, I would argue that capitalism does kind of go hand in hand with Protestantism
Mhm.
well, I
because
mean,
it developed in that Reformation was huge because
Adam Smith
Catholicism was a
was
monarchy.
he was Scottish. He was very Christian.
Yeah,
And and he when he wrote that, people always read, Wealth of Nations, but before he wrote that, he wrote a whole book on ethics
Mhm.
and how to behave, and this is what you need to do. So it's like the thing that I think we've lost a little bit with the capitalist piece is that if we lose the sense of responsibility that we come
Right.
into our lives with, then if we lose that sense of what we're responsible for, which I think has really gone out the window,
start with pulling your own weight.
and yeah, pull your own weight, but
Yeah,
also, what is your place? And yes, all of that has changed, because women, here we are. Sorry.
Right.
Okay. Um, but that's, now as women, we need to figure out what is that balance between, having children and
Mhm.
having a career, because we are just as smart as guys are, and we really like to use our brains.
Right.
yeah.
You know,
There's
Having a
a
child is
correlation
going to be a
between
sacrifice. It's like, how do we figure that out? And now we actually have a choice, so we better figure it out, or there ain't going to be any more kids.
but
Right.
the unfortunate burden for women is that there's a correlation between the health of the family unit
Hmm.
and the woman's participation in it as a
Yeah,
homemaker versus someone out
yeah,
making a career because fundamentally human
absolutely.
beings work best with one at home and one at out.
Right. And there
So
are certain careers that lend themselves better to homemaking and certain careers that take you out of and away from the home necessarily. And so that balance has to be understood. That you have to understand you're giving one thing. There is a zero sum game here. You can't for when children are young, especially you cannot do it all.
no, and having myself been a weekend warrior for my three as they grew up, I can tell you right now that the job of being a homemaker full time for children is a noble job at the very
Mhm.
least. It's not something that should ever be put down or put aside. It is a career, and the reward is endless when you raise beautiful children. That's for a man or a
Well,
woman.
and
Essentially,
I think that goes
women
back
tend to
to
want to do that more than men, but that's something a man or a woman can do. I mean, it's
well,
not something.
both can do it, but I think yes, you're right. You're saying you're playing to the particularity of the gender roles. And I mean, I preached a whole sermon on Sunday about this thing about knowing our place, and men have a certain place and a role to fulfill. I was preaching on the text in Hebrews about let the marriage bed be held in honor by all, and
Mhm.
don't defile marriage, and the culture or the society that defiles marriage will face God's judgment. And we're not just talking about fornication, although that's part of it. It's not just talking about having sex with whomever. It's talking about honoring the respective roles in the marriage bed. In the husband as the husband, the wife as the wife. They are morally equal, but their roles are different. And if I think you can trace the crisis that we're experiencing now with transgenderism and the violence that goes with it, as we saw last week, to the crisis that women and the feminist movement brought in the 1960s. I mean, if women aren't going to be women, then some men are going to decide that they can be women instead, because
Right.
there need to be women as
Yeah,
women in this world.
right. Of
Yeah.
course. It's interesting that just getting back to the capitalism thing here for a minute. Um, One of the biggest arguments that communists and socialists use to put us down is that capitalism leaves the poor behind.
Right.
So some people do better than others. So you have a billionaire on the top of the hill, and then you have people begging on the street 2 blocks away.
Right.
And that's supposedly the problem with capitalism. That's what they use to put it down. They use class envy to put it down.
Right.
And the answers, and we don't articulate the answers to that argument good enough. And the answer to that argument is basically, hey, at least our way, people have a shot.
People
Because
have
the other way, everybody's suffering in the street.
Well, that's it. And
at least this way, some people can do well. Maybe some are always going to. Didn't Christ himself say, and I can't quote the verse, but he did say at one point that there will always be. I got this from Jesus Christ Superstar, so forgive me. But I think it's in the Bible as well. I'm pretty sure I read it, where he's basically saying, look, there's always going to be poor and suffering, right? There's always going to be people that are going to struggle. We just have to, do the best we can with it, right?
He has said the poor will always be with you. That is exactly right.
That's right. So there is no way around that. So capitalism, however, is look in a world of flawed human beings, there is no perfect system. Capitalism is obviously the lesser of the two. Is the lesser of the two evils, right? It's capitalism.
Well, the thing is that yes, you're right. But the thing is that communism doesn't get rid of capital. It just concentrates capital in the hands of the state, and basically it removes any kind of free enterprise, any kind of individual initiative or activity, which is exactly what you need to get ahead, which is exactly what you need to progress as a society, which is exactly what you need. That kind of motivation, that kind of incentive is exactly what an individual needs to better himself, and collectively what betters society as a whole, right? So
absolutely,
there is no world free of capital, and so
right.
And so
we have the ism on there, which means we spread it out. We allow it.
Exactly. The question is the right use of it. And when Jesus says you will always have the poor with you, it's really more than a statement of fact. It's also a word of condemnation. He's saying, look, if you use your capital well, if you use it rightly, if you follow God's law, that you will not have poor among you. The law of Moses.
But that means the poor have to do that too.
The poor have to do their share.
They have to want the help too. The ones that want it.
That's right. And so, part of what we see in a welfare state is that people are incentivized to not work. People are incentivized to not get ahead, to not use their God-given talents, they're incentivized to go into debt and to live off of the system.
And that's deliberate.
If you look at God's law, if you look at the Old Testament law, debt was forgiven every 7 years. Every 60 years, everything got reset to the original tribal inheritances, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a capitalist system, but it was within boundaries set and rules set by God, with the assumption that the land was an inheritance of the people of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. I would say that argument is not being made well enough to people that because class envy is the number one argument that communists and liberals use to win over the most people.
That's right. Well, it goes back to the whole question about whether this was a deliberate subversion or not. And the whole idea of alienation is a Marxist idea, right? This idea that women are alienated through childbirth and, the patriarchy, that the laborer is alienated by the capitalist from his labor, that the gay or the transgender person is alienated from his true sexuality by oppressive social morals, right?
Yeah, right.
What communists are very good at, what Marxists are very good at, is taking people's oftentimes justified grievances or sense of discontent and fanning it into a revolution. And they prey on that idea of alienation. And I think a secular form of capitalism, which is what we've lived under for the last since World War II, really just leads to kind of commercialism and materialism. That, remember the Charlie Brown Christmas special? That was a criticism of the commercialization of Christmas, right? And so if you take Christmas, if you take commercialization too far and you call that capitalism, that's not going to satisfy anybody really in the end either, right? How many more iPhone upgrades do we need? We don't. How many more binge watching, how much more content do I need to really binge watch? I don't. So, the communist comes along and says, the Marxist comes along and says, look, the real source of your alienation is your sexuality. sexuality or the fact you're a woman or the fact that you're, a person of color or whatever. And that I think, and this may be where, the church has to step it up. We really have to talk and say, no, your alienation is because of sin. Your
Yeah.
alienation is between you and God, right? And
Right.
and you feel this way because God is angry at you. But there is a remedy for that. There is a solution for that, and it's Jesus Christ and the blood he shed on the cross. So that's what I try to preach every Sunday. That's in one form or another.
Yeah, it's always good to give answers, not just this, not just the
Not
problem.
just the problem to find over and over again. That's right.
That's right.
And understand that it's flawed. I mean, the capitalism is not perfect. And I've always been under the philosophy that too much of anything is a bad thing.
Well, yeah.
Even capitalism. Too much
You want to
capitalism
have
is a bad thing. Like you mentioned, how many iPhone upgrades do you need? Like, and if you have $1 trillion, like Elon, look, I believe I've always in favor of people making as much money as they want to make, even though I don't have much. I don't get jealous of other people who do. Get rich, go for it. Usually that trickles down to in the form of jobs, and most of those people that are at that level, they invest back into the system.
Right.
However, again, too much of anything is a bad thing. If you have $1 trillion, do you need $2 trillion? Maybe at that point, maybe they should be a reset every 7 years and feed some of that excess back into the system. Or if you're down and out and poor and you want the help and you can't get it from your family and friends and you can't help yourself and you really need it, there probably should be a little social office at the corner there to help people that truly need help. So again, nothing is 100%. Everything is shades of gray, right, Jake? I mean, there's some shades of gray in there.
Well, I'm all for a social safety net. The problem is that you have political operatives who basically turn people's grievance. They profit off of grief.
They twist it around.
Grievance. Yeah.
They profit off of misery. And so, I lived in New York City for a decade, and I saw one of my churches I pastored was involved in a real estate transaction where we were able to sell some of our property. And, these developers are rapacious and which is on one level fine. They want to build a building, they want to get rents, and they want to turn a profit for their investors. I get it. But when you tie in the whole government apparatus, what is supposed to be incentives for low income housing, and you realize that people are just gaming the system. They're just finding all kinds of ways to, build quote unquote low income housing. And you look at the price tag on it, and you're like, how is that low income?
Right.
And so
it's just a little below market value.
That's right. It's a little, and then it resets after, the next tenant or whatever. There's all kinds of escape clauses so that within 10 or 15 years, a sort of, a supposed low income housing development is market rate. And so, I think there's just a lot of that going on in these systems that market themselves as, on the backs of the poor and the genuine misery that's out there, but it does nothing to actually alleviate it.
Speaking of the poor, how do you feel about the mental hospitals thing? And I have some reason for that to be personal. I have a family member who is currently in long-term commitment, and it's necessary because this person absolutely can't live with other people, can't live by themselves,
right,
and was about to be homeless right before they were committed. So what do you think about the whole mental hospitals reopening thing?
You're talking about the call in the wake of sort of the rampant mental illness in this country to reinstitutionalize people. Is that it?
Yeah.
So my understanding of that is that in the late 60s, I think it was started with Ronald Reagan in California, but they deinstitutionalized vast majorities of people. Right?
From a psychological, Thomas Sazaz.
In the 70s and early 80s, they let a lot of people out.
So they closed a lot of these places, and there was a real patients advocacy and patients' rights movement in the sense that you had people being committed for maybe flimsy reasons. I'm just trying to argue for the reason why it happened. So you had a lot of power and authority concentrated in doctors. You had a lot of power and authority concentrated in parents and in some cases even husbands to commit their wives. And
that was probably all through history, right? That used to be the way it was.
To the extent that I mean, we get the word bedlam from the mental hospital, I think from the 19th century or even the 18th century in London, called Bedlam. The idea, and so yes, I mean, look, it's a complicated question. It's not one I've studied in depth. My sense is that we did go probably a bit too far in terms of forcing treatment on people, things like lobotomies, electric shock therapy,
absolutely.
Medicating people against their will. A lot of that, I'm looking at, Ezra Pound, the story of he was a poet who was committed to a mental hospital because of his poetry, I think. And
Yeah. With
you
John Flynn.
well, yeah, and so his friends
Mhm.
eventually were able to get him out. So I think there was probably a lot of, my sense is that the mental hospital system was an example of the nanny state going to the extreme.
Hmm.
On
Hmm.
the other hand, there's a clear need for it, and you can't just let people live in their own filth and walk the streets and terrorize people.
Right,
So
right, right.
um,
So the
I
answer's in the middle. I mean, the answer's
I
somewhere
say
in
the
the
answer
middle
has to
again.
be somewhere in the middle
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, because you're right, in the 60s and early all through history up until the 70s, I'd say, they were your husband could institutionalize in his wife just for acting a little strange.
Right.
Or if
And
you
they
put
do
on like
act
if
strange
you wore
sometimes.
weird clothing, or if you were seen talking to yourself, or
Right.
Yeah.
anything like that, you could be thrown in for that. So it was, I think, too much to an extreme at the time, and I think it made sense to revisit it and start getting people that didn't belong there out.
Hmm.
But what we did is we emptied the places.
Yeah.
There was probably some that should have been kept in there, and
There
so like
should have been some that should have been kept in there, and then yeah, we just went too far with towns should be able to have vagrancy laws. They should be able to say, look, you have to be out of here by sundown. You can't sleep, in the public park. Or I mean,
Right.
these were all common sense local ordinances, community-based ordinances that ought to be upheld, and they've been overruled in the last few decades by this movement that basically says that, well, no, the nuisance factor is not what's important here. It's the person's right. And if they don't want help, they don't have to get it. Yeah, we need to find some.
there's a happy medium in this
It
area.
has to be a happy
On
medium.
one
Yeah.
hand, I think that, I mean, this is a free country, so if I think for the most part, if you're not bothering anybody,
Hmm.
you should pretty much be able to do what you want. That doesn't mean you can sleep in the public square. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that you know it's live and let live. I think if
Yeah.
but at the same time, some of the, like everybody knows. I think most people know somebody who is toxic in a way that they'll tell somebody one thing and they'll go to somebody else something else to create a lie that causes a problem between those two people. And
Right.
then when they fall back on them, they deny it and they accuse you of what you did. Like that's what left wingers do. I guess
Mhm.
what I'm getting at here, Jake, is the 20%, 10% we're talking about. A lot of these people are wacky and they're toxic. They
Yeah.
spread lies. They cause people to fight each other that wouldn't otherwise fight each other. And they do toxic things with their mouth to cause major problems. And aren't some of these people some of the people that need medication? Maybe not institutionalization, but need some kind of help.
They need help. I question whether it's medication
I
based on
agree.
what's coming to light about these medications, but they certainly need help. Yeah.
They need help of some kind. They need help. They need structure. They need because there's a lot of damage that can be done with crazy people running their mouth and doing maybe just running around the town square acting weird. That's weird, but that's not really hurting anybody. But doing some of the things that some of the people do. And so as a result of this, here we are 30, 40 years later. A lot of these people that were what might have been actually in an institution back in 1975 are now a CFO somewhere, or are now running maybe even running a pastor in some church somewhere. Like right. So like, that's what I worry about. That's the problem with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it raises the question of who's really competent to decide these things. And, given what the public health, the absolute failure of the public health authorities during COVID, I'm really not too keen to give them much authority anytime soon
Yeah.
again.
And someone like Karen Bass, the mayor of LA. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been watching. What in the world? Who is she? Is she even sane?
She's a
That's what I'm
Yeah.
getting at here. I
She's a
mean,
known
Yeah.
communist.
she's a nut.
She's
Right.
a known communist. She's
Yeah.
doing this on purpose.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
Well,
this.
yeah, and I think that's where I think goes back to some of what we were saying earlier about, the profit in misery, the trade in misery. There's a
Mm,
cynicism that's set in. It's like, well, we're not going to make these people better, but we can use them to inflict the most pain on the law-abiding citizen as possible in order to sort of achieve our goal of revolution. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. One of the things I preached on last Sunday was that freedom for the Christian, freedom from sin is not just freedom from personal sin, like, oh, I'm to stop yelling at my children or drinking too much. When those are personal sins that we
Yeah.
can and should become free from. But the Christian also has the right to live in a free society, meaning free from these kinds of nuisances, free from this kinds of exploitation, free from this kind of lawlessness and criminality, free from the motorcycles going past my front door at 2 a.m.
Right.
At 500
Get it every
decibels, right? I
weekend.
mean, freedom isn't just a personal thing. It's not freedom to do, it's freedom from these other things. And so when we use these people who are truly suffering, the mentally ill, when the left uses them as a weapon
Cool.
to beat up on
What they're doing.
the whatever they want to call it, white culture, patriarchy, or
Yeah.
capitalist system, they're
Western civilization
Western
altogether.
civilization. They're using very troubled people in a cynical way, but they're also using it as an offensive weapon to deprive, towns and good ordinary law-abiding citizens of their freedom from this kind of nuisance.
Well, that's what I worry. That's what I worry about. That's what I worry about when I hear there's a lot of people on the news and the media on our side that talk about how the Democrats have to redo their messaging and their strategy. Well, look, that ship has sailed as far as I'm concerned. Right now, the Democratic Party has been infiltrated and taken over by these wacko Marxists
Well, yeah.
that are doing exactly what you say. They're not interested in our vote anymore.
No.
They're only interested in stirring up the 20% of the people that they know are woo a little bit and getting them to fight, which is why I fear a major civil war here in the next 15 years or so.
Well, there's indicators that say we're heading in that direction. I pray that we don't go to the point of violence.
We're already kind of there in a way.
There have been,
I mean, it's starting to percolate on us.
When the history of this time is written, I suspect that people will look back and say, "Oh yeah, that was that," and they didn't recognize it at the time. But kind of when you look back at the Civil War or other periods of history. But I pray we won't get there. I am encouraged by certain things the administration is doing, but we just need to stay vigilant.
We have to stay on top of it, and I think what we're seeing happening is many of our major cities are being taken over by these far left wing mayors, and the good people are leaving those cities. So you're going to start. What you're going to have is over the next 10 or 15 years, you're going to have this urban hub of communism in our major cities, and the rest of the country is going to have to go in and fix it.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
I certainly hope not.
Jason, I want to tell you what happened when I went to that event with Jonathan.
Yeah.
Jonathan had he had a friend who went through it's a prison-based program that teaches prisoners how to be hospice guides. And it's got a phenomenal background. Not one person who has gone through that program has gone back to their bad ways when they left. So it's a phenomenal program. So there was an event. There was a woman who was doing a documentary, and she had an event where she wanted to get a bunch of the graduates from this program together. And Jonathan, because one of his friends had gone through the program, he went and he asked me to come and take pictures and do some video and stuff. So I went, and just about every person that he talked to there, and these are all folks from inner city Bridgeport, Waterbury. There was even somebody from Hartford. Every single one of them was Republican.
Mm-hmm.
They were conservative. The people in the cities don't necessarily want what they've been being served up. And if you listen to what the people in Chicago are saying,
the people in general are behind this.
Please bring us in some help.
Please,
because this is awful. And,
I know. And then they got their leaders standing up and saying the exact opposite.
So it's like I don't agree with you that the inner cities are like full of communists. I think
no, I don't think that. I'm not saying that the inner cities are full of communists.
Okay.
What I'm saying, though, the leadership in the inner cities is a lot of communists.
Yes, you got me on that.
But what's happening though is the people that can afford to leave these cities are leaving the cities.
That's right. Yeah, and they've done that for generations.
And they're gonna do it at an accelerated rate now when we have these extremists taking over. And then you're going to be left with the unhinged in these cities.
Well, and I think
that's what I worry about.
This is where I'm hopeful that the administration can do something, because the only thing that's keeping these communists, the only thing that's keeping the cities, the centers of Marxism and communism is the money supply. And if Trump can use things like
Right.
the ICE and cutting the money off, sanctuary cities. If he can cut the money off from these cities, as so long as they have these sanctuary policies, I'll bet you those policies will change really quickly because no one's getting rich anymore.
Yeah. They've
there's just
already it's already Trump's already done a lot to take
yep.
some of the money sources out from behind these people already.
And that has to just continue. And, as he's doing that, he's just ripping up the wiring underneath these control panels so that they don't operate anymore. And if he
Yeah,
can
that's
do that,
great.
then I think these cities can be saved. I mean, the cities, they go back, it's basically machine politics in cities and has been for a long, long time. Instead of the old Irish Catholic sort of bosses running the cities, now you've got these Marxists, but but it's the same apparatus, the same machinery, and if that can be defunded, I think that machine will just grind to a stop.
Yeah, how was that? It's all about the money at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think I know Selena doesn't like it when I say this, but at the end of the day, right, in the long run, I like to talk about big picture things, right? As time goes on, we have the internet now, we have more communication, transportation. The Earth is getting smaller and smaller. We're looking at outer space now, we're looking at Mars. There's no room, and I'm talking about over the next 100 years, okay? There's just no more room on this planet for despots, dictatorships, guys like Putin, Kim Jong-il that are murdering their people and then putting up a mask around it. Like there's just not, we just can't have that in the long run, right? It's got to
I would
go.
argue with you about that.
Well, I think you thought I meant, what you thought I meant was that we were going to send a bunch of spies in there and like take over these
I don't
countries.
know that we
That's
were.
not what I mean. I'm just saying philosophically in the long run, we just can't, the world's just not going to survive with this kind of, because of where we are with, like, we have the nuclear weapons been around for 80 years. We just can't afford to have this. The Earth is either going to be a Dark Ages place like it was in the Middle Ages, or it's going to be a free world. One or the other. It's not going to be both. It can't be both in the long haul.
Well, I'm optimistic. My bet is on freedom.
I agree. I think it will happen. I think the good guys usually win in the end, right? They do. It may be a struggle, it may be a pain in the butt, but in the end, the good guys do win most of the time.
That's right.
Yeah. So I don't know. You got anything else on your mind, Selena?
No, I don't think so. Are we there, Jake? Pastor Jake, do you have
You got anything else you want to talk about, Jake?
No, it's just always fun. I'm glad to do it. Things are happening, as I said, since we talked last time, just getting a lot of momentum. We've had a couple of revival meetings at the church in the last couple of weeks with lots of people coming. Jonathan was at one of them. So there's just, I was talking to one of my members today who wants to start a high school group with the Turning Point people, their high school outreach group here in Connecticut. So I'm really optimistic and hopeful that Woodbury, especially my church, can become a hub for all kinds of exciting things.
I think the main theme is, again, people shouldn't misunderstand the separation of church and state. That only means that churches can't tax you and churches can't get involved in government directly.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you can't talk about politics in church. It doesn't mean you can't talk about what's right and what's wrong in church. And we know what's right and what's wrong in terms of geopolitics and the way Connecticut's being handled right now. So
that's right.
I think it's a great way to rally the people. God-fearing people that go to church, generally speaking, want to do the right thing and are conservatives generally. So
that's right. And it's also a call for Christians to kind of come out of their bubble and say, look, we are part of we're here. We're part of this world, and we need to we were blessed to live in a democratic, system where we have a voice, and we should use that voice. And
absolutely,
because so many people want to take it away from us.
Right.
I do have one more question. I realized I needed to ask you. I think were you talking to other pastors about this?
Well, we are. I mean, I am, and there are a number of pastors. I'm going to have a breakfast with one on Thursday, where I'm just really trying to get them to say, things have changed. The Johnson Amendment was put in place about 60 years ago to really put a muzzle on churches, to keep them from speaking politically, to keep them from applying the gospel, the implications of the gospel, to the political realities of the world around them. But the IRS has suspended that. It's not going to enforce that. So, but I find that a lot of pastors are just sort of stuck in this. They've been trained to never, to speak obliquely, to talk in circles,
some of them might be scared to actually.
Yeah, they're scared now, and I can understand. I mean, look what happened to me. I mean, it's scary to get a call from a police detective. So
yeah, it is.
And so it's I understand the fear, but I'm trying to get pastors to get over that fear and to get their congregations behind them. But I'm also really trying to, it doesn't take every pastor in Connecticut to do this. It only takes 20 or 30 of us to basically say to the politicians especially, and this is going back to the town council, the Republican town committee question, to basically show up at these committee meetings and say, look, you're going to run somebody fine, but do the pastors of this town support him? Now, if they're the rainbow flag kind of pastor, I'm not too interested. But
Right, right.
if it's a conservative gospel preaching pastor, I'd like those pastors to feel like they should be part of these conversations. If a nominee wants to go to the RTC and get nominated, great. But the pastors should be there too, asking questions and saying,
Right.
where are you on issues that are important to Christians? Where are you on the trans question, on religious liberty, on abortion, and all of this? Because we represent people who vote, and so that's what I'm trying to get the pastors to do. Kind of this idea of an endorsement, officially or unofficially, of the minister's endorsement is really how I'm trying to promote it.
Wouldn't it? So, isn't it? It's probably true, though, isn't it, Jake, too, that the churches around Connecticut, some of the churches around Connecticut, are a microcosm of the state as a whole. And what I mean is,
Absolutely,
they have leaders or pastors that are flying the rainbow flag, but yet the congregation is scratching their head a little bit, So
That's true. I mean, I think that's even less. I think, unfortunately, that's less and less true as these congregations age and die out. But certainly, for a long time, you've had very liberal ministers, liberal leadership, and conservative people in the pews, and that's still true to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a car, and I have to meet this person because I was ordained in the Episcopal Church, and so and I still very love that tradition. I had to leave it because it became too progressive for me, but it's still something I have a deep feeling for. But there's a person who drives around Woodbury, and I think it's a she, has a bumper sticker that says the Episcopal Church on one side, and then the other side says Trump, and you almost never see that combination. And next time I see this person, I need to just flag them down and say, I have to give you a hug.
Yeah.
Because it's true. There are a lot of people who just suffer silently.
No, that doesn't have to be that way, does it?
No, it doesn't.
And the thing is that I guess I'll ask you a practical question. If a congregation decides that they're not satisfied with the direction, or that the minister of the church is not preaching Christianity properly, or whatever, is there recourse? Do they have
Well,
a way
it depends on the polity of that church, but in most Protestant churches, there's a way to vote a minister out. The problem is is your next one going to be any better?
Right.
So,
True.
it goes back to the seminaries and what they're teaching.
Yeah. And same thing with medical school too. I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
Education is so important. That's the root of all this.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that's why the communists went after that first.
Well, makes sense. Yep.
They started that in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we are there. Unless there's something else you have in your mind you want to talk about.
No, good. Yeah. Enjoy.
All right. Well, we'll say good evening to everybody, and God bless America, and God bless Connecticut.
God bless America. God bless Connecticut. And thanks for coming, Jake. We'll have you back again this fall. We'd love to have you back.
God bless. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.